Good morning. I'd like to introduce the Orbit project. Orbit is the Observatory for Responsible Research and Innovation in ICT. It's funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council and run jointly by Montfort and Oxford universities. Orbit is transitioning into a not-for-profit spin-out company to deliver RI training services into the ICT research community. Transitioning into a profit spin-out company to deliver RI training services to the research community. Transitioning into a profit spin-out
Welcome back. In recent times, drones have transformed from being just a mundane tool to a full cultural sensation. An example is the agricultural sector, where drones are applied through the use of advanced sensors and digital imaging capabilities to enable farmers gather a richer picture of their fields. In Nigeria, a drone startup company is trying to provide drone services to farmers in the area of harvest. We have a drone expert, Ojione Confidence, who's here with us to tell us more about how this works. So welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
How do you... In recent times, drones have transformed from being just a mundane tool to a full cultural sensation. An example is the agricultural sector, where drones are applied through the use of advanced sensors and digital imaging capabilities to enable farmers gather a richer picture of their fields. In Nigeria, a drone startup company is trying to provide drone services to farmers in the area of harvest. We have the drone expert, Ojione Confidence, who's here with us to tell us more about how this works.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Orbit is the observatory. Good morning, everybody. My name is Martin DeHever from the Orbit project. Orbit is the observatory for responsible research and innovation in ICT. We're an EPSRC funded project transitioning into a not-for-profit spin-out company run jointly between the universities of Montfort and Oxford universities. Our job is to try to embed responsible research and innovation across the ICT research landscape, and our primary instrument for doing that is through training, provision of training courses to centres for doctoral training. We work with about 20 of those at many universities across the UK, and today's course is My name is Martin DeHever from Orbit, Observatory for Responsible Research and Innovation at ICT. We're an EPSRC funded project transitioning into a spin-out company run jointly between the universities of Montfort and Oxford. Our job is to embed responsible research and innovation across ICT research landscape, and our is through training courses to centres for those. Today's course is
on my phone.
So where are you
Can you never
based?
connect to it?
You know the
good. Okay, well, welcome. My name's Martin DeHever. I'm Director of a project called Orbit. Orbit is the Observatory for Responsible Research and Innovation in ICT. So,
Okay, well, welcome.
all right, just bear with me. Why is that? That's not good, is it? That's not good. That's not good. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Awesome. I love that. I love that. Okay, can I just turn that down? It's probably the best way to do it. I want to turn up a little bit, some videos in here. Okay. We love technology. We love that. It's a wonderful thing. Great. So, yeah, I'm from Orbit, the Observatory for Responsible Research and Innovation in ICT. We're based at Montfort and Oxford Universities. Bernstyle, joining us today as a guest lecturer, is the principal investigator of Orbit, and so ethics director of the Human Brain Project and other things. So myself and Bern will be taking today's course and tomorrow, and it'll just be me on Friday. So this is our agenda for today. What I'd like to do is start off by going around the table, giving you to introduce yourselves, talking about your research interest and what have you. I'll take some time to set the scene, give you an idea of what we believe RRI is really all about. And quite a real-world scene setting as well. Break, and then we'll talk a bit about the policy background to this, what RRI really is, and then we'll take a lunch break. We'll then get into some case studies, and hopefully you'll find those interesting, stimulating, and very up-to-date. We'll then be doing some work on those case studies and presenting back on your RI-related findings on those. And then we'll have a session in the afternoon for coffee, and then a session in the afternoon on Human Brain Project, which is a flagship, €500 million project, so quite a scale. So that'll be a very interesting insight into what is a major initiative with big RRI implications. And then we'll end at around 4 o'clock. Okay. So, first of all, if I could ask you kindly to talk about your little bit about background and your research interests. So, I'm Martin DeHever, Director of Orbit. I'm an engineer by training, background in aviation, air traffic control systems, but I've done a lot of work on taking technology from a concept through to implementation. So that kind of covers everything from aeronautics through to computer vision systems and also IoT as well. So I've done a number of projects in those areas from kind of concept through to delivery.
Andy Wheeler, I'm a lecturer here in the engineering department at the Whittle Laboratory. My area of research is turbomachinery aerodynamics and thermofluid dynamics. So we work with companies like Rolls-Royce and Siemens, Mitsubishi Dyson to try and improve turbomachinery performance used in gas turbines and aero engines and domestic products as well. And another area of work that I am involved in is the use of turbomachinery for low-grade heat recovery for renewable power and improvement of efficiency of industrial processes.
So what would be the application of that? I mean, sort of ground source heat pumps?
It can be heat recovery from manufacturing processes or in decentralised power, geothermal power, these sorts of things.
So there's something in the news recently about an organisation in the UK taking heat from disused coal mines and using it to heat industrial complex? Is that the sort of
Um,
application?
This would be more the use of to try and generate electricity. So, for
Okay.
instance, imagine you had um, um, a manufacturing process that created excess heat, particularly, and that can be often be difficult to recover in the form of useful electricity at low temperatures. And so we have sort of complex fluids that we can use within the turbine to extract
Okay.
extract useful power
Okay.
from that.
So it's an efficiency.
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
So I'm Deborah Longleton. I'm a lecturer and head of graduate education in the chemistry department, and I'm director of education in the School of Physical Sciences, which covers several departments in the university. So my previous life, I was interested in organic chemistry. Still am interested in organic chemistry. That's what I lecture in the department. But I've shifted on to be much more involved with education, particularly on the graduate side, which is why I've got me involved with the CDTs, which is why this training is in place today. Organic chemistry, the applications are very broad. The pharmaceutical industry would be a really obvious example, but you can use organic chemistry to make all sorts of stuff, polymers. I mean, you could go around the whole room, you'd probably see lots of things that you might be able to use organic chemistry, apply that to make elements of. So.
Very good, thank you. So one of the case studies we'll be looking at later is this idea of chemputing, the idea of the convergence of computing. So the work that Leroy Cronin's doing up at Glasgow on the convergence of computer science and chemistry. So I think he's looking at a number of things. So
looking at machine learning.
well, I think
Applying
for
that to-
discoveries, like compound discoveries, sort of rapid prototyping, but also around production.
Yeah.
So using 3D printers to create custom reactionware, and then using the printer itself to then automate the manufacturing process. So are there things going on in Cambridge like that? Or
So I'd say the thing which comes to my mind first is the CDT that we're starting off pretty much next week in chemistry, which is using machine learning with chemistry to improve processes that we're currently pretty slow at making lots of compounds, to try and use machine learning to learn about which compounds would be the best ones to make. And there's already some work in the pharmaceutical industry in this area, but to do it in an academic setting.
So there's some case studies you might find interesting. I know you're not
I won't be
staying
here,
there.
but I can catch up there because you're filming it. It
Great.
would be very useful to look at.
The question is the CBT an AI CBT or a chemistry?
It's chemistry led, but has people involved from chemical engineering, biotechnology, from engineering, physics. So it's pretty broad.
But it's not, I mean, we have, what, 10 or 20 specific CBTs on AI? And it's what, when I heard machine learning, I was just wondering whether it's under this heading.
No, it's not under that heading. It was under the other CDT. It wasn't in that branch of the funding.
Thank you. Please.
So my name is Sonia. I work in research and development program here at Cambridge. What we do is really training and development of researchers across university. I work with PhD students and trying to. So my interests are really now in education and development, etc., rather than science. But I'm trained. My first degree was in physics, textbook level physics, and my PhD was in medical engineering. But then it's really another life, one final role. And the research I've done was human brain, experiments, see what people do with the MRI machines and then what the brain does, and then that creation style. But as I said, this was all because of something early 2000s. Once I finished the research for a couple of years, and then I moved into the last 12 years into the roles that are about teaching, learning, and supporting researchers in PhD students primarily in higher education.
Okay, very good. So there's quite a lot of work going on around quantum sensing. I know they're looking at using qubits for actually producing more smaller and cheaper MRI machines. So we've seen some examples of that. Whether it actually works, of course, is another matter. But the kind of spin-off effect. So I think what they say, they create these qubits that are very sensitive to magnetic fields. So obviously, it's like, rather than it just being a computational device, it actually has sensing applications. And I understand that actually there's more progress made on the sensing side than there is on the computing side, really. So it's one of these situations, very much an RI thing. They're working on one topic, a particular way of creating this entangled state and playing with it. But actually, they find there's an application in a completely what we think to be an unrelated area. And in fact, it's advanced quite a long way to the point where they've got demonstrators and actually fairly late sort of TRL 6 plus devices. So
Well, that's the thing with research. Some people don't really know some things, but where it would take you, because some things, okay, that's interesting, but it's more further rather than what perhaps.
Indeed, yeah. And it's a big RI challenge. If you're working in your very narrow area, how do you get outside of that and try and find out what the other applications are? I mean, it's possible to do, but at what stage in the evolution? Doing that very early is quite hard. It's quite difficult to explain what it is or even why you're doing it. Maybe later when it's more developed, it is possible. But yeah, so thank you. Welcome.
My name's Christian. Like Sonia, I work in the research development programme. Focus more on arts, humanities and social sciences and PhDs. Although I have a background in training STEM. My own research background, I did a PhD in philosophy. So seemingly remote from the concerns of today, but actually my research has evolved in parallel with my role and my work in research and development to look at the concept of interdisciplinarity, the concept of it, history of science, and how that can help inform research and training, but also, to touch on something we talked about earlier, look at ways to bring researchers out of their silos, find a common tongue in which they can communicate their research. I think that a lot of what I imagine we'll be covering today will be somewhat relevant to that, and I'll be looking forward to applying some of this stuff across the social sciences at
Okay, that's very good.
Are you both cross CBT, so you work?
All PhD students, CBTs and beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So just we work in the same department, providing training for all PhD students.
And the relationship between the universal training and the CBT training, what is that?
I suppose CBTs are funded, so they have extra funds for their own training, so corporate training and so on. We have central service, so we provide for everyone. So we had people from, in case there's 100%, we fund local training as well, as well as in-house training. So you're trying to do it more, because although it's all great to do it within your cohort, it's also very good to do it with people as well, with other people as well, from the university or from different departments that you can kind of find common interest from. So just something to see that actually their life is not very different, because they're still a PhD in Cambridge in the last 3 or 4 years, etc. So it's quite nice to get out of the local bubble and see where it goes. So we're trying to encourage more CBT students to come and join us.
And what sort of topics do you train or teach?
Communication, personal effectiveness, teaching and learning as well. So some of the people who are teaching undergraduates and so on. So these are the kind of wide topics that we have as well. So it's like engaging with others, leadership, things like that. So this is
How much comparative training do your PhD students go on to?
it's Cambridge, we don't like our also. That's kind of, I think, politically correct answer. So, I mean, I'm not really sure how CBTs work and what is kind of compulsory for them. But we do encourage students to kind of engage as much as possible, so we give them regular updates what's available and so on. It's quite popular. We have bookings pretty much all the time. So people are engaging, students are engaging, they are coming for training, but we have starts, in numbers and so on, that we put on any and so on. But I don't think there is kind of compulsory, there is strongly highly recommended. As long as
But if somebody says something that I don't want to do this, and that's it.
yes, but the honest, in my experience, I've been here for 7 years now. In my experience in Cambridge, most of the students actually are interested and they do want to engage. What we still sometimes find is some of the supervisors are a little bit more reluctant. They might not be encouraging, but if you come with more, you have to do this experiment, and it can be done the day after. So now it's about finding the right balance between actually allowing students to do other things as well as doing the research. But to be honest, I think pretty much we have quite a lot of students from all the schools around the income. But we do also have people who just not that's not for me. There's not much to do.
Okay, thank you. So you talked about interdisciplinarity. So, I mean, we can talk about C.P. Snow and the two cultures, can't we? And say, well, you know, those two sides that he looked at neither really understood the humanities and the sciences didn't really understand. They couldn't communicate. They didn't have language. They didn't have. But do you think this applies across all of the different areas in science as well? That actually different technology, science disciplines actually don't speak the same language?
Yeah, to a large degree, and I think the concept of the paradigm to try and encourage this sort of common tongue, if you like, using Hume's terminology, but only for heuristic purposes. It's not, we're not selling it as, you know, this is the be-all, end-all of how to understand science. This is the way to it. But it's an evolving project, so I'm still looking at other ways. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. It's a growing area of interest for myself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting area for RI as well, because if you're trying to get people to think about other applications for their work, you need to be able to communicate it in terms that others can understand.
Well,
particularly when some of these things are so hardcore, and we'll get to that later, that it's very hard to really, almost impenetrable in the language. I mean, I did some printing at the front desk here. The guy was printing out a paper for me, and he said, "Oh, I think these ones are out of order." And I said, "You know what? It probably doesn't matter." I don't think he got the joke, but actually, when you look at something that's so impenetrable, are you really going to know it's in a different order? Not really. But it's a real issue, isn't it? Unless you're very steeped in that particular topic, you're not really going to know. So, you know, we're in a world of ultra specialisation. But an ever increasing need to be able to share your thoughts and your insights in a way that others can appreciate, understand, and potentially apply.
Because that's the double-edged sword, isn't it?
Yeah.
Specialisation. On one hand, we have very specialised, accurate research and information generation, but then on the flip side, it's going back out and connecting it all up, and science ends up being quite disparate, which is not always helpful.
So here's a thought. So I was at the Oxford AI conference last week. So our conference was on Monday, and then AI at Oxford was on Tuesday and Wednesday. And there was a talk given by a notable academic that shall remain nameless, Nigel Shambol, who was talking about the new humanities centre that's being set up. They've got a gift of 150 million from somebody from Blackstone. And within that, there's a centre for ethics of technology, ethics of AI. And he talked about what Oxford kind of brings to that conversation, which is that we have the philosophers who can work with the technologists to try and kind of dig out these issues, whereas he said, well, actually, in Cambridge, they're much more technology focused, and therefore they may not necessarily be able to address the problems in the same way that we can. But I wonder if you might care to comment on that.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like I'd be qualified to comment on that simply because I've been in this role for a couple of months now. So my understanding of Cambridge as a whole is.
So the question is it outside in or inside out?
Yeah.
So do you consider the broader societal implications of your work as a scientist, or do you have it done to you, with you, by by a philosopher or a social scientist who comes in and sits on your shoulder?
Yeah,
which is a better approach? I don't have an answer, but he raised it, he flagged it, and he almost threw down the gauntlet. So I'm very curious to know what your thoughts are.
I'm almost hesitant to say that there is precisely one way to go about it. It would very much depend on the particular project or particular aims, or even the institutional setting. It's so many variables at play that there's always the risk of having, let's say, a general rule or a general approach, but I don't think that's suitable at all. In fact, again, that's a broad challenge for promoting interdisciplinarity, is that sort of coinciding with that future specialism, you want to allow the homogeneous element of research, those fundamental differences to exist, whilst unifying them, but in that sort of non-Hegelian manner. You don't want them to be collapsed into one broad unity, but you lose the value of that heterogeneity. So, that's just a very la-di-da way of saying that it's got to be a way to allow for a dispersed unity, if you like. So I would always be reluctant to go into sort of it should be like this or it should be like
Yeah, I suspect it's non-digital, but it's just it's an interesting point, isn't it? Are you a technologist who does social science as a because you're better placed to understand those issues whilst you're doing the research, or is it something that is done as an overlay, or as a veneer, or as a support to research activities, with obviously the inherent risk of language and culture and all that stuff. But interesting topic for a future debate. Anyway, thank you so much. Sorry for putting you on the spot, but it was something that he really threw down the gauntlet there. And as we were at Cambridge today, otherwise I had to ask the question. Sorry to Nigel if he's watching.
Right. My name is Prefet Rri. I'm originally from Germany. I've been at one university for about 15 years now, where I lead a research group that's called the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility. So, as the name suggests, we do ethics and social aspects of IT. And we have been doing this since 1995. So, we claim to be the oldest group specifically focused on this. It was set up by my predecessor, Sam Ferguson, who was possibly the world's first, possibly the world's only ever professor of computer ethics. So when I joined them in 2003, that was a very niche area. If you told anybody I do ethics in computing, they'd say, what? Which is absolutely not the case anymore. As Schwartzman was around, so was 100 million just in the country. So we've been in this space for quite a while, and we've done lots of projects. Most of them probably EU funded. So all this is sort of the outlier, all this is the success of the EPSSC research project, that was sort of framework for responsible innovation in ICT, which we ran, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And as part of that, we looked at how do the EPSSC research community in the UK perceive their responsibilities. What do they think is the right thing to do? How do they actually then do that? And it turns out that, in general, most researchers, not surprisingly, think they need people. But they often find it difficult to deal with specific questions. How do I actually now deal with this ethics, or how do I deal with having children in my research group, and that sort of thing. So that's why, and that coincided with the EPSSC adopting this principle of responsible innovation, and we're going to talk about what that is more detail later on. But one of the outcomes of this initial project was that EPSSC recognized they need to provide some support. They can't just say we need to responsible innovation, but not, let's say, how that works. And Orbit is an attempt to bridge that gap, so to help people provide resources, provide support, to make sure that researchers who are EPSSC funded, and others as well, primarily EPSSC focused at this point, have ways of understanding, of dealing with the issues that they encounter. And for community and cultural development, people collaborate on this, comes back to transdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, come together, being willing to exchange ideas and develop good practice together. So that's really what we're about. So the training aspect is one aspect, but we also provide other sort of services. So we work with people who, for example, write proposals, who are interested if they want to know something about how can I put this information in my proposal, we try to help with that. So that's all it. The other things worth mentioning, so in the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility, the CCSR, we currently have something like 6 or 7 live projects that look at all sorts of different things, many under the headings of responsible research innovation. So we've got one that looks at it on an international basis, that tries to figure out how does that materialize in places outside of Europe. We've got others that look more specifically at particular applications. So for example, the use of robots to help autistic children learn. That's one quite high profile one. We have one project running where we look at how responsibility might be integrated into research performing organizations, specifically in the marine research environment. So these are people looking at fish populations and how would that translate into responsibility. So that's the broad spectrum. I also lead a European project that looks at ethics and human rights in AI and big data. One of the reasons why I asked questions about AI facilities, we need to see how they play out in practice, how they interpret the challenges they face. And the human brain project about which I talked in more detail as well.
Thank you. Very good. What are your thoughts on interdisciplinarity in RI?
Well, some people, I mean, Richard Owen, who is the person who came up with a lot of the conceptual work behind responsible research, he's the one who did the research for IndiSRC that led to the area framework, which is what people will see as a booklet as their flavor of responsibility. If you ask him, he says responsibility is only about transdisciplinarity. That's it. Bringing people together, not just interdisciplinary people, but actually coming up with completely new ways of seeing the world by working together and finding new ways. He says that's the core. I see what you think.
Do you think he's right?
I think there's a very strong case to that. I think that there are also, so I think at the core, I would say that responsible research innovation is a high level of reflexivity. So it's the idea of meta responsibility. So it's a responsibility for ensuring responsibilities are there. When you have responsibilities, for example, in research ethics and research integrity, but also data integrity, data management, use of methodology, that there are lots of different responsibilities that already are defined, exist, and people are aware of. And my take would be that responsible innovation really is about aligning those, making sense between them, making sure that they go in the same direction, don't contradict each other. And that's why I think responsible innovation sort of sits on top of existing responsibilities, and that's the meta responsibility. But I do agree that the works of practice only as a transdisciplinary approach. So you have to be able to be willing to go outside your comfort zone, to think about what else you do, who else you can talk to, and be willing to take that on board. And that's why I think responsible innovation goes very strongly beyond science education. It's not just about explaining to how to do. That's part of it. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's also about going the other way, listening to other stakeholders, what they think. So yes, so I agree with Richard that it's a core.
Is that not theory in practice? Is it possible? Is transdisciplinary research feasible? Is it actually possible?
Anything is feasible if you have the right incentive structures.
Which are?
Well, if you put structures in place that would support people to work together, which at the moment I don't think we do, but I don't think it's good enough. We are disciplinary science is what we do. That's what people are comfortable with. That's what IndiSRC is comfortable with. That's what funders in general are comfortable with. And those silos we always try to break down are actually quite strong and they get reinforced over time. So I think in order for this to be successful, there would have to be ways of going beyond that. And CBTs may, for example, offer an opportunity to do that. Within a CBT, you may structure incentives to go out and do something else. So you may, for example, require your students in the first year as part of their initial training to do a project which is explicitly outside of what they're doing. Which is possible. That might lead to lots of resistance, but it might also be very considerate.
Do you think that this kind of transdisciplinary kind of enabling approach is something we should build into RRI?
Yeah.
If I may as well, you write about incentive structures, and there was an ESRC report sort of on this area that came out not so long ago. One of the big things they identified as being an obstacle to the counter incentive is the promotion structures and the way the ref is conducted, which tends to nudge researchers into their specific disciplines. Yeah, exactly.
They go willingly.
I was trying to be a bit diplomatic, but yeah, no, absolutely, and that's a big problem. You know, it's a very tangible way in which they're being kind of. So everybody will talk about interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, it's all a great thing, but actually the incentive structures within higher education are not promoting it at all, and that's a huge obstacle.
But I think it's the transdisciplinarity is not an absolute. It's not everything you do. It's part of what you do, isn't it?
Exactly.
So the question is how much of your capacity is spent on translating your research into a form others can appreciate, and also looking to absorb input from others in other sectors. Is it 10%, 5%? What is it? I mean, it's not an absolute. It doesn't have to be everything, is it?
But at least it needs to be formally valued, you know, because they strictly assess very specific criteria,
Mm.
and if interdisciplinarity and so forth is not part of that, then we're at loggerheads.
Yeah.
There's a tension there.
I mean, in industry it happens because there are large tech companies that allow their staff a proportion of their time to work on their own projects. They encourage that. But also I think it happens in academia as well. We were up at Newcastle recently, and there was a chap in the room who was an expert on opto, and actually on solar panels and organic solar cell technology, on plastic substrates and things. But he said, on my side interest, as I do work on carbon nanotubes, and but he had a actually he was from Durham, but he was with us in Newcastle, and he'd done some work on creating a system using liquid crystal with 2 types of carbon nanotubes suspended in this liquid crystal for machine learning. For actually, it's actually a computing device in its own right. So, and that was actually quite a lot of stuff. There were some fairly big publications out of it as well. So really out of his comfort zone,
Yeah.
but clearly being encouraged to do that, applying his skills to not a totally unrelated area, but some distance away from solar performance of solar panels. So it does happen in academia, you know. Obviously.
But I think that
Yeah.
it's really the infrastructure areas. That's promotion structures within universities. It's funding opportunities which are totally disciplinary.
Yeah.
It's publications.
Yes.
Journals tend to be very specific on what they want to publish. So it's all geared towards disciplinary research, and there were ways for that. It's been extremely successful. But it's also limited.
Yeah. Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you very much. Please.
As my name is Shakti, and I'm on the Research Governance and Technical team at the University. So we're involved in doing research and technical training, and various policies and support the community. And in my previous life, I can also add I did a PhD in biochemistry.
Okay. So you support the ethics committee for what kinds of research? For
So this is the Central Ethics Committee.
okay.
which is
Central for Cambridge or for
Cambridge.
or for
So in Cambridge is one central research ethics committee,
Okay.
5 school committees, and then 20 independent ones.
so do cases get escalated up through the levels of ethics approval or
They don't barely make it up to the central committee, but
Right.
there is an appeal process.
and what kind of thing, not mentioning anything specific, might be might be considered by the central committee? Like the Supreme Court then, I guess.
So I've been in the job about a year and a half, so nothing as such in the last year and a half, but I've just missed out on kind of
The big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. It shall remain nameless.
Yeah. So the Central Ethics Committee largely deals with policy and taking questions from the school level and departmental committees on what the correct processes are, what the correct interpretations of things are, and they monitor the work being done by those committees.
Okay.
And it's only really the very, very complex ones that go up to us for
Right. So in terms of an ethics approval process, would you say what you have is a standard approach or an unusual approach? Sort of,
in Cambridge.
yeah, as compared to other universities of your level.
The structure being quite involved is unusual.
Yeah.
Each department essentially decides on their own approach,
Okay.
and we don't tell them what they should do.
Okay.
It's not unique, but it's unusual. Actually, we're probably in the minority, but there's a number of universities that do take that kind of approach. There's ones who have their own as well, and it's all decentralized.
Okay. And so when you get appointed to an ethics panel or whatever, is it a paid role or is it are you appointed to it or is it a
Very rarely. So what they've reported back this year is none of the academics are paid. Occasionally, the administrators it'll be specified in their role, but usually it's co-opted in the department to help out.
is it a busy role and is it something that requires a lot of time or is it sort of a part-time thing?
For the individual committees,
Yeah.
it really depends on the committee. Some see it part-time, some see it as full-time, even with summer workloads. So it depends on the types of cases they get, how efficient they are, what other resources they have available. Just one, but I think that's an ex-academic, isn't it?
So, yeah, so I think there are laymen on a couple of board vacancies for. We essentially encourage the school level committees to have lay members, departmental ones don't need to have one. But yeah, lay member nomination, it's a number of things. So, someone who's an ex-academic or somebody from a different university, but we have had local solicitors and things like that as well. So, but yeah, so
So, departmental entities, so on that whole, so they don't have any audio from school curriculum or university.
but they
Okay.
have to report.
Okay, they have to
Yeah, and there are set kind of there's expectations on their terms of reference and membership and general structures, but then they have to freedom in terms of reviewing and things like that. But they report on everything they feed back upwards towards the central committee. So there's an oversight system that's it's a very cascading.
And then it comes to you and say, well, that would be not quite okay, it's not effectively done, or it's not what to be done, then you can go back to them and say.
Yes, the higher committees can have
Okay, thank you. That's very much.
Does that happen?
Rarely. So I mean, we could. There are. I think I'm aware of a handful of cases where that sort of thing has happened. But
Depends on one field or
yeah, so appeals or whether you've made an initial decision and then referred it up to the school committee for a second opinion and they've gone their way. But yeah, for the most part, things run smoothly.
That's very much, thank you. Thanks. But we'll talk quite a bit about ethics later, so that's why I wanted to warm you up for that.
So I'm Rhys Baldwin. I'm head of policy governance and technical research at Checkers, and basically I do similar work to Sinead. I would run the ethics to research and technical. Difference being I've got another hat which is more research policy related research ethics. My background, I was historian and early historian, so I'm quite a swerve into the kind of the ethics world. So that was about 8 years ago.
Okay. But what are the parallels between the work you do now and your former?
Not many. No, I mean,
In terms of the emergence of kind of ethics?
yeah, I mean, so my specialty is 15th, 16th, 17th century history. So everyone is there. So there's not much in the way of kind of human participant ethics to go around there. Obviously, the integrity side of things is very similar in terms of plagiarism and application and things like that. But really, I mean, I've moved very far away from where I started, to be honest.
Interesting, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I know it takes a while, but it's really good to get an idea of where everybody sits and your particular perspective on things. So we'll get into some of the more real-world applications of RRI, and start you off with a video. And hopefully it sounds right.
In recent times, drones have transformed from being just a convenient tool to a full cultural sensation. An example is the is often instructed to detect if the crops are healthy or if they are not. So it's a goal of man eye involved for humans to grow crop by crop and inspect each and every of these crops. So this ineffective way of farming, we are now developing drone technology in day-to-day activities. The drones can spray 100 hectares around 10 hours. That 1 hectare of ground that takes 2 individuals to 4 hours takes the drone 10 minutes, and the accuracy is top notch because
So they talked about an application there for drone technologies in terms of agricultural applications, and particularly in Africa. So in terms of the pros, well, better production, and what they mean, they really, I think, is in terms of improved yield. That seems to be their main measure of better production. But also reduction in waste, so the wastage of the herbicides, insecticides that they're spraying over and above being done by hand, so the result less labour intensive, so there's people actually involved in the process of spraying. But also they talked about this as potentially an enabler of food autonomy. This is quite a kind of a big thing, because this is a country that's coming, effectively a developing country that's looking to potentially make a huge leap from a very manual approach to food production to one using very advanced technology. Although they may achieve a level of food autonomy, they potentially open themselves up to all sorts of new risks that their economy may not necessarily be able to cope with as well. So I think as an enabler of food autonomy, it's very much a double-edged sword. Cheaper food is one of the outcome measures that they saw as being an advantage there, and probably a whole bunch of other things. But really the questions are in the situation, well, what happens if you use drones to replace people? What happens to the people that are currently employed in these jobs spraying insecticides? It may be in some ways, to our sensibilities, it's an advantage, because they may be not being exposed to semi-toxic chemicals and being put in situations where not doing very pleasant jobs. But if it's a choice between starving to death or doing a not very nice job, then it may be filtering through our particular sensibilities and not necessarily those of somebody in an emerging economy. Just emphasising that point about food autonomy, it's all very well to say that you can use the drone technology for very effective distribution of herbicides, but and potentially enabling food autonomy. But what new risks are you introducing into this agricultural system that you may not necessarily be good at managing? To what extent are you then placing your food autonomy in the hands of state actors from overseas who have access to that technology, or maybe have engineered backdoors into it that gives them some potential control? So, it may be an incredible enabler. It may allow them to leapfrog various stages of development and have food autonomy and cheap food and a well-fed population and all that, but it may open them up to all sorts of new risks that they've never even considered, or the value of the innovation may, as far as they're concerned, based on where they are now, massively outweigh the risks as they are right now. The other issue, of course, is this is a rather fragile and fairly expensive technology. So it's all very well to say you're going to deploy this system, this drone spraying system in Africa. But is the infrastructure there to really support such a fragile technology? If you throw this in the back of a pickup truck and drive it 20 kilometres over a rough road, it's likely to get broken at the end of it. I did some work a few years ago on humanitarian landmine detection, and there were two technologies we were looking at. One was an ultrasound technology, which was very cheap and very robust, not particularly good, but the other technology was ground-penetrating radar. And in the end, DFID decided in their infinite wisdom to fund the ground-penetrating radar technology, which was £10,000 a unit. And that's very fragile. It requires an expert operator, and you can't just throw it in the back of the truck. So even though it would work very well in a controlled environment, the moment you put it down into the field, it became problematic. But it was very effective. So how do you make that choice? Is it better, or do you want it, how long is it better for? And I think it's an issue for drone technology. If people are not in a position to maintain them, or don't necessarily appreciate the delicacy of some of these technologies, or their fragile nature, can you really rely upon it? Is that food autonomy that such a technology enables really just a flash in the pan? Actually, when it comes down to it, you spend a fortune on handing out all these drones, and then actually find that they're not effective long term. So there's an issue there. Can it be relied upon? But also he talks about this idea of new business models being required. Do they have the financial services systems necessary to allow these things to be funded, to be leased out, to be sold as a service? You're providing an agricultural service here. You're not really just selling technology. So do they have the financial system? Is there adequate trust in the system? Is finance available to the right people to actually fund the procurement of these things and the use across the whole of the country? And in that situation, who owns and controls the technology? Just because you're receiving a service from somebody, if that funding from that ultimately comes from a state actor externally, what power do you really have over your agricultural system? To what extent is food autonomy really autonomy, when actually you just become a slave to somebody else? So it raises all kinds of issues, really. But overall, do you feel that this is a positive or a negative, considering those things and maybe other points?
I was wondering, I mean, the sort of funding and the practicalities to me seem that they would possibly start to answer some of this. Because if I was a business, for instance, wanting to set up a drone service, then if I can't provide something which is affordable and it works well for the people I'm trying to provide the service for, then I'm just going to fail.
Indeed. Yeah.
So some of the aspects about the fragile technology or the funding models, I think would be answered by practicality, as long as you're not trying to enforce or replace existing systems through, I don't know, incentive schemes or subsidies or things like that. Then I would have thought that the practical implementation of this might help to solve some of those problems. So whether it's a positive or negative, perhaps, is to some extent a practical. Would it work in practice?
Indeed. But that's an alright issue if you think about it. So looking at this as you might say, well, this technology has the potential to deliver this outcome if these issues were addressed.
Yeah.
So you're effectively anticipating and trying to take action to put in place the mechanisms to maintain these things, to fund these things, to train the things, to transfer the STEM skills to the individuals that are going to be using them, so that they actually they can really deliver the benefits. So that would be an anticipatory activity. So this is potentially beneficial, but we see these risk factors, and these things need to be addressed. Equally, the issue of regulation, you mentioned in there that you need a license to use these things. So is the regulatory framework adequate? Is there adequate? I mean, there's a concept here of trust, isn't there? Can you trust the state to allow you to continue to use it? Is it affordable to do that? So you might argue that for this technology to really realise its potential benefits, these things have to be anticipated and addressed almost before it's deployed. If you deploy and it's found wanting, are they just going to go back to square one, having spent a lot of money and not really achieve very much? Maybe that's just a very natural technology cycle. But yeah, really.
I suppose for me, we can stood out really during the first minute or two. And there are lots of pros. And I still don't know if it's possible or negative. I just can't make my mind up. But one thing that sort of stood out was that, yes, there are lots of cheaper food, etc., lots of benefits there. However, it's what about people? I mean, who actually are working in those fields?
Yeah.
I mean, this is perhaps some remote area which is not going to have a huge job market for those people that are doing jobs, hundreds of possible people. So for me, that's kind of the first question I would have: how would you manage that?
Absolutely. And as far as they're concerned, I don't think it's their concern. They've flagged it, but as in we're doing people a favour because they're not working with dangerous chemicals, they're not walking in the fields that are always terribly hot. But it's back to this point, well, it's not a choice between having a nice job or not a very nice job, it's between starving to death and having a job that gives you enough to maybe send your kids to school and to allow you to progress. So and I've heard that voiced in sessions in Parliament as well, where that issue has come up of pushing standards onto people when actually it's not a choice between whether we have a nice job or a wonderful job, it's whether we have food or no food.
It's a substantial question.
It is, yeah. It's this issue of kind of cultural lens and what lens you're looking at this through.
So one of the cons is needing more information. So if we have that information, there are definite cons and this is not the list. So I don't think I would make a decision just yet. Because it probably is an answer, is a fragile, right? There probably has been a test done, and it could be a test done really quickly before
So what you're saying is you can anticipate these issues and then try and iron them out to see whether there is a problem. Yeah. So quite a lot of these things could be anticipated and maybe addressed before you really made the big mistakes at scale. So it's a good point.
Most of the comps are addressed, but some of them by government, which is obviously outside the control of that company. So any government that sees drones coming in and placing people in fields and that sort of thing, that's what they do with people who will be having unemployment. But so important. I mean, one thing that happens is it seems to be that those are easily recognisable. So that is once these become ubiquitous, you are controlled sufficient because it's a spray, not poison, spray all sorts of things.
Indeed.
There's certainly questions of those after export.
I mean, they're most likely to be imported, in fact, isn't it? But it may be built locally or modified locally. And that's a great segue into our next section, actually.
But can I ask
Yeah.
something there about how do we know where it's our responsibility, in a way, to worry about certain things? Because the jobs question is an interesting one, but it's one which, any automation, there's always been a worry about the loss of jobs. And I think in the fullness of time, it's proved not to be true because you need people to make the machines and so on. But it's a transient problem, as far as I understand. People are displaced, and then there's a shifting. But is that the person who's researching the technology? Is it? Well, I suppose this is a question really. Is it for us to worry about?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, what I'd say is that maybe as a researcher, if you're aware there's a potential issue, you may have a responsibility to flag that issue, to communicate that issue. Whether it's within your gift to address it, you may not have the power, the experience, or the position to do that. But one thing you do have is the ability to communicate that message and allow then people to take that information and do with it as they will. Yeah. I mean, RI says that's the role. It may be that you take a higher level of ownership of that issue if you are, truly embracing the concept. But there's this issue of agency. What power do you have to actually do something about it? But the one power that you do have is to communicate that message, and then allow people to take the information on board and then to accept it with the. I mean, there's also a challenge about how you communicate. There's this whole concept of the Cassandra syndrome, isn't there? The curse of being able to see the future and not being believed. To what extent do you just communicate negative messages about technology, and then it'll be seen as being the harbinger of doom, the bringer of existential risk, which may or may not be true. So there's a challenge there, isn't there? If you say everything is bad, but I think to couch things in terms of a lot of positives and some associated negatives is perhaps a better way for people to try and formulate their own responses to come transition. If you know that there's all this good stuff going on and a few issues that go with it, one might try and consider those one in the context of the other, not just in terms of risk. This makes life more difficult, these things make life easier. Okay. But it's a really good question. As researchers, what is our responsibility is one thing, accountability is a completely different thing, isn't it? Are you actually going to be dragged up in court for doing something or held accountable in some way? It's another question, but I think RI community would argue that researchers have a responsibility. Well, that's a much bigger question, isn't it?
I think particularly with regards to the economic perspective of technology, it appears that a lot of policymakers have accepted that there is a responsibility that they have taken. There's a 2016 report that the US President on artificial intelligence, there's a very similar one last year from the North, where they all highlight that unemployment or shifts in employment may be a major consequence of that particular technology. And then say we need to do something about that. Reskilling, retraining, having appropriate job markets and so on. So that seems to be something that policymakers are reasonably happy to accept. I think they're possibly because it's a problem they understand. Unemployment is something we kind of have for a long time. So we have to raise people more or less accepted. I think there's a much more interesting question about what are the things that we're worried about which may come up now, which are more difficult to think about than we haven't heard existing.
Okay, I think I've sorted out the video problem now. The audio problem. So hopefully the next one you can actually hear it properly, but we'll see. So this is another application of a very similar technology. You may have seen this video. Just well, I'll talk about this later. It's quite interesting. Sorry.
Directed almost 3,000 precision strikes last year. We're super proud. It allows you to separate the bad guys from the good. It's a big deal. But we have something much bigger. Your kids probably have one of these, right? Not quite. Hell of a pilot? No. That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of sheep explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that? That little bang is enough to penetrate the skull and destroy the contents. They used to say guns don't kill people. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now trust me, these were all bad guys. Now that is an airstrike of surgical precision. It's one of a range of products. Trained as a team, they can penetrate buildings, cars, trains, evade people, bullets, pretty much any countermeasure. They cannot be stopped. Now, I said this was big. Why? Because we are thinking big. Watch. A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available today. We have a distribution network taking orders from military, law enforcement, and specialist clients.
The nation is still recovering from yesterday's incident, which officials are describing as some kind of automated attack, which killed 11 U.S. senators at the Capitol building.
They flew in from everywhere and attacked just one side of the aisle. It was chaos. People were screaming.
You can see high windows, very small, precisely punctured to gain entry to the building.
What did you do? I just did what I could for them. Things weren't even interested in me. They're just buzzing.
Government sources admit the intelligence community has no idea who perpetrated the attack, nor whether it was a state, group, or even a single individual.
So if we can't defend ourselves, then we strike back.
We are investing very heavily in classified defense projects.
We make it our deterrent like our nuclear deterrent. We stockpile in the millions, the billions.
At key facilities. The White House, the New York Stock Exchange, Wall Street. Well, we wish we had boots on the ground in every community in this country.
Ollie?
kind of with people. So, oh, well, come on, Oliver, put it on. Oh, no, it's not like that.
Elmo, listen,
I see some photos here with somebody, and I can see lots of likes and.
oh, shit, you're talking wow. Is that a spy stuff by the military?
What is this video right here?
No, nothing. It's just, doing like speed.
On a depression or whatever. Honey, you're not going into politics, are you? I mean, Mom, safe theater, just like you said it would be. Police are not safe this morning. They were property lists.
Claim relaxing firearm legislation would be useless against the so-called slaughter box.
And to stay away from crowds. When indoors, keep windows covered with stuff.
Protect your family. Stay inside.
Over here. East.
Authorities are still struggling to make sense of an attack on university campuses worldwide, which targeted some students and not others. The search for a motive is apparently turning to social media, and a video shared by the victims exposing corruption at the heights.
That's often surprising. The weapons took away the expense, danger, and risk of waging war. Now we can't afford to challenge anyone. It's not even the smallest fringe group or crank.
Who could have done this?
Anyone.
Dumb weapons drop where you point. Smart weapons consume data. When you can find your enemy using data, even by a hashtag, you can target an evil ideology right where it starts.
This short film is more than just speculation. It shows the results of integrating and neutralizing technologies that we already have. I'm Stuart Russell, Professor of Computer Science at Berkeley. I've worked in AI for more than 35 years. Its potential to benefit humanity is enormous, even in defense. Allowing machines to choose to kill humans will be devastating to our security and freedom. Thousands of my fellow researchers agree. We have an opportunity to prevent the future we just saw, but the window to act is closing fast.
Pretty shocking stuff, isn't it? So you might be interested to know that I actually ran this course up at Edinburgh last Friday, and I showed them that. And some of the students that are in the CDT, IB Core, in offshore wind, offshore power generation, some of them had actually been in that lecture pit, and they'd never seen that video. So it's all over the internet. It's been around for about a year or so. But we actually did this in Edinburgh, so they were quite shocked. So the only thing is, Stuart Russell, at the end, I hope he's speaking fairly soon actually on this particular topic. The problem is he's a bit too late, really, because
Oh, it's been a point that
And so I'm going to start off with the hardest mode, which is the lead mode. So let's go see if we can keep up with this.
Can you get in front of me? Ooh, it's getting low. I like this. All right, now we'll try and lose it. Let me see if I can lose it. Can it keep up? I don't know. We'll go around the block. It's still right there. It's got me. It's trying to stay right
right in front of me. Let's see what happens. It's keeping up, folks. It is definitely keeping up. It is doing a really good job right now. Woo! Oh, it's getting kind of windy. Let's take it right. Can't keep up. Cannot lose it. It's struggling a little bit. It is dodging in between trees, guys. This is crazy. Alright, pick up some altitude.
Right, you get the general idea. So that's real. This is not some fantasy made up thing. YouTube's covered in videos of people evaluating this bit of tech. So this was actually created by a company called Skydio, who are actually a Berkeley spin-out, which makes it even worse, really, doesn't it? It actually came out, and it was launched around the same time as that video came out. It was $2,600. It's now down to less than $2,000. And in fact, you can rent one. You don't even have to buy it. You can lease it for a short term if you want to do some filming. So that's what you get. Available on the internet. As far as I'm aware, there are no export controls, so it's perfectly possible to buy that thing. It's a bit bigger than the slaughter box, but it's nevertheless very similar in terms of what it does. What makes it even worse, however, is that there's actually a thing called a software development kit that goes with it, which allows you to create your own applications. So you can write your own code, get it to do particular jobs, interesting little kind of assignments. It may be offensive military applications or things more to do with improving the number of hits, the number of likes you get on Facebook or whatever. But it's actually been designed to be flexible, to be applied to a myriad of different applications, and all of these things are available to anybody who wants to use them. But the Achilles heel of that technology is the fact it's only got a 16-minute battery life. So the next time you're down at the gym, when you put the treadmill on, just put it on to 17 or maybe 20 minutes. And then you should be able to outrun the slaughter bots pursuing you down the road for your evil ideology that starts here. But of course the thing is, if you're a researcher working on an area of technology, you're not really thinking about how it might be applied in the real world. You're just doing it for the beauty of the pursuit of knowledge. You're perhaps not thinking too much about Skydio or the slaughter bots or Mr. Russell's warning about controlling technology. So on the right here, we've got an article for people at MIT working on neural network chips. I guess that's an application for neuromorphic computing and other things. So that massively cuts the power consumption of devices that do that kind of thing. And then on the other side here, we've got an announcement here around the application of graphene technology to energy density of storage devices. So again, we have the ability of creating much higher energy density batteries, which could fix the fundamental flaw with our Skydio drone that allows it not to fly for 16 minutes, but maybe for 60. And maybe at that particular point, it suddenly becomes a lot more dangerous than it is at the moment. I'm sure the researchers working on these two areas are not really thinking about this particular application. Maybe they are. I mean, perhaps more likely to be for the AI chip people to be considering that than the energy density people. But nevertheless, you don't really know what other applications of your work are until you've actually built it and people have taken it away and applied it. So just an example of how you may think you're working in a completely unrelated area, not working on aeronautics or defence or drones or control systems or AI or anything like that. But in fact, your work may be a direct enabler of a very dystopian technology. But the thing is, of course, our slaughter bots and our agricultural bots are remarkably similar in terms of the technologies they use. They're using autonomous control systems or semi-autonomous. They're given a job to do and they go off and do it. They use high energy density battery technologies, lightweight manufacturing, so the airframe needs to be light against the power issue. Also, they're both semi-consumer grade technologies. This is not controlled military mil-spec technology. These are things based on consumer technology, mass market applications applied to these jobs. So there's a ubiquity of availability of these things. They're out there and they can be purchased probably from Alibaba in component form and put together. They're using computer vision, so even the agricultural bots are using computer vision to work out where they are and where to spray. Machine learning is obviously part of it, so they're adapting to their environment. So these are working on doing research in all these different areas. You may actually be enabling the dystopian and perhaps slightly more utopian applications. But of course, you don't really know. In fact, you may be doing both. And it's hard to balance the two, which is more beneficial, which is more problematic. So the question is, overall, what do you feel about the slaughter box in terms of the technology? They're painted in a very bad light. You know, you're not going to sell too many slaughter bots based on that video, are you? But maybe you would. Perhaps there are people out there that would love to buy those. It's an interesting question, isn't it? What do you feel?
Yeah, I suppose you could argue that the ability to be very targeted in defence is ethically better in some way than sending off a bomb or that could kill indiscriminately. Well, yeah. So I suppose that would be one way that you could argue the case, I suppose. But obviously,
it's a good point. We'll come to that in a minute. It's interesting. The role of you want military technologies to be especially good, so they're especially targeted, so they can address a specific issue and not. Yeah, that comes to that.
Yes, I suppose I agree. But again, who's making this decision? Who should be killed or not? Again, so it's up to the button pressing individual or whoever gives the command, to see how this can be used. So I can still see more bad and good with it in any way.
Yeah, it's something that we all struggle with, but we're all kind of subject to it as well.
Yes, and like, as it says here, quality to long hands easily.
But hands can change from being right to being wrong quite quickly. Mujahideen were useful. Charlie Wilson used them to fight the Russians, and now they're ISIS or whatever they are. Now they.
This is very fluid.
Absolutely, it's the temporal aspect to it, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, they're obviously terrifying weapons of war. I suppose if you were, because what are we trying here to balance different types of technologies? Are we looking at technology in isolation? Because the example given by the guy, the very emotive guy at the start, was a nuclear weapon against a targeted attack where you could, in theory, wipe out a very targeted population. I mean, how you target it, I mean, there's a moral question there, but you're also balancing other weapons of war in this case.
Well, some might argue that one of the great benefits of nuclear weapons is that they are so untargeted, so they make them almost unusable. Whereas this is highly targeted, so it's very useful. Yeah. So the point is, it's so nuclear assured destruction and all these kind of things. That the scale is so enormous and so indiscriminate. You just can't use it. You can't even consider using it. Whereas these things address that issue, but are equally destructive and a lot more. So they're more scary. What I give up.
Yeah.
And one of the problems is with the technology is it's sort of inevitable. So you have two options. You can try and control the technology or mitigate the technology's problems. So either you treat it like a chemical weapon with massive controls, or you try and mitigate its deadliness as an putting things into the tech that make it less likely to be used.
Indeed, countermeasures, controls, regulators, black boxes.
But it's incredibly difficult. For a researcher deciding whether to do technology, to do research for each technology that will lead to that particular outcome is the question. It's better I do it because I can put those things in place, or better not to do it on the assumption that inevitably someone will probably do it. And that's really difficult.
And that 97 segues us into the next section. Would you like to just grab a coffee quickly? We've just got fresh coffee. Just take 5 minutes. Is that okay? Okay, so should we get started? We are going to run out of time. We're going to run into lunch, so I'm mindful of. Just bear with me a second. Actually, let's just wait. Because we're still doing setting the scene, and we are running a bit late. So I don't want to crash into Bern's time too much. So I'll go through this part fairly quickly. Yeah, let's get started. So okay, so it's all very well to raise concerns. I think we've identified a few issues here with technology. We recognise it has positives and negatives, but it's very hard to balance whether one outweighs the other. But even if we do find something that we have a concern about, what do we do about it? It's all very well raising concerns, but if you're not capable of actually addressing them, then what's the point? So who has agency in this situation? So I'll just give a few real world examples of where people have used particular mechanisms to impart change. So here's a case of the California Teachers Pension Fund. They wrote an open letter to Apple about their concerns over the overuse of smartphones and in particular the impact on children's well-being. And the reason that anybody was really interested in the California Teachers Pension Fund is because they had $2 billion of stock in Apple. And so the way they expressed their concern was in Apple, if you don't address this issue of smartphone addiction in children and the impact on their well-being, the value of our shares will go down. So we have the right to express that concern because we believe that if you do address it, it will benefit the value of our shares. So that's the way that they express their concerns in the context of a shareholder. Whether they actually, as a California Teachers Pension Fund, have a concern about the well-being of children, one might think so. But actually, they're just a pension fund, really. And they're just saying that if you do this, and the terms they use basically that if you don't do this, then Google will, and therefore it'll be very hard for a parent to buy a phone for their kid if it doesn't include functionality which helps to address well-being issues or concerns or overuse issues. So they showed agency, and it did have an effect. Some of you may have seen this video. But
Apple is close to becoming the first company worth $1 trillion. It's now valued at $948 billion, and with that valuation, the company says comes responsibilities, privacy responsibilities, social responsibilities, and they say people aren't spending too much time on their products. CNN's Money's Lori Siegel has just finished an exclusive interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook. Talked about all of it.
Normally at this developers conference, you are trying to get people to pick up their phone more and more. You guys announced a tech addiction tool that will almost help us limit our screen time.
You know, we've never been focused on usage as a key parameter. And we're rolling out great tools to both make people aware of how much time they're spending and the apps that they're spending in, but also how many times they pick up their phone, how many notifications they get. You know, empowering people with the facts or will allow them to decide themselves how they want to come back.
Tell me about your own tech habits.
Yeah, I've been using it, and I have to tell you, I thought I was fairly disciplined about this, and I was wrong. When I began to get the data, I found I was spending a lot more time than I should. And I don't want to give you all the apps, but it's too much. And ask themselves if they're picking up their phone 10 times an hour or 20 times an hour. Maybe they could do it less.
It's really interesting because there's this idea of who's in control, man or machine.
yeah,
We believe that we as human beings.
it's actually worth watching that in its entirety because it talks a lot about, we would never focus on usage and all that kind of thing, which is kind of hard to believe. I mean, in the early work that was done on the iPhone 1, they talked about kind of copying what was called at the time the crack brick. People use their BlackBerry so much that they were addicted to it. So and the iPhone was meant to, it was called BlackBerry at the time. And it was true, people lived on their BlackBerries. They were really quite smart, simple but smart devices. So if they're saying that they weren't trying to create something that was, quote, addictive, clearly BlackBerry were, although of course BlackBerry are dead now, so maybe that's what happens when you're a crackberry producer, you end up, like Walter White, dead in the ditch. So here's an example here of a transnational organisation, in this case WHO, who classified the overuse or the problematic use of digital gaming as actually a disorder, and that potentially opens the door for the creation of treatment, but also for class action lawsuits against gaming companies. So they've tried this. There are some very interesting reaction videos from the computer gaming community, but this was from the news the other day, actually.
It took over my life to the point where, my family paled into insignificance. It ended up costing me my job, it cost me my house, it cost me everything.
The symptoms of addiction are painfully familiar, and so increasingly it's this man's problem. Gaming.
It affected my work life greatly. I was always tired, I didn't want to be at work, I would much rather be at home on the PC. It affected my personal relationships, as you can imagine. I didn't have a personal relationship. We were living in the same house that I had at the time, and at the height of it, I had 2 children, a partner. But, it's like we were living separate lives because my life was sitting in front of the computer.
Senior MPs have heard the message. Today, they accuse the gaming industry of failing to tackle addiction.
I think the games industry should accept a much more proactive responsibility. It gathers the data about how people play, how much they spend. It can identify the outliers, people who maybe are suddenly playing a lot more, or for a long period of time they're playing a lot more. And I think it should take an interest in the development of those players, and not leave it up to the player themselves to self-refer and say, oh, I think I'm playing too much, or leave it to parents or others. I think the games companies who are making money out of their players should do that.
The issue's been creeping up on gaming companies. Just last year, the World Health Organization said it was worried about gaming disorder. Although, when the MPs quizzed game CEOs, they argued that was a question for doctors.
We aren't able to go out and diagnose individuals. We aren't able to go into their home and tell them how to play.
I don't think it is our primary responsibility to determine how much individual players should play for.
I asked the recovering gaming addict whether he sees hope, but he's just struggling to stay on the straight and narrow.
I really like gaming. It's like, I suppose, people with other addictions, say like drugs and alcohol. I like.
Anyway, so it's just an interesting example. There appears to be kind of regulation or legislation that's going to come out to address this kind of issue in the UK as well. So action is being taken, whether it's seen to be effective. But there's a real tension there. As a gaming developer, you're trying to create something which is people use a lot, that love a lot, that really kind of live. You're creating almost other, an escapist kind of fantasy, really. And you want people to use it a lot, and also you want to monetize. You have an obligation to your employer to try and maximise their shareholder value, as well as an obligation, arguably, to society to make sure you don't create something which is problematic. And how do you balance those needs? Gaming companies are profit-making companies, and their job is to increase shareholder value. They do that through use of games. The other thing that's not mentioned there is this concept of loot boxing, which is where there are mechanisms within games to get people to spend money. So, but it's been argued that actually they are gambling mechanisms, and some of them probably are, some of them probably are not. So you're actually allowing young children to engage with these loot boxes, to engage in gambling type behaviour, spending money within the context of a game that seems relatively benign otherwise. And so the question is, how do you balance that need to create shareholder value, to create engaging, interesting, immersive experiences online or offline gaming, against the concern about it becoming a problematic and well-being challenging activity? How do you do that? And there is a real tension there in how much is enough and how much is too much. I think it's true of anything. It's a pleasure-centric activity. Anyway, let's press on. So here are some examples that sort of leading on from your last point about where employees have had concerns, and sort of flagged issues about how tech companies should work in defence. So the first example is with Google. There was a project they were running for the US Department of Defence called Maven. Maven was a computer vision project looking to analyse real-time video from drones. Those computer vision algorithms were meant to tag things within drone footage, including targets, and that was not supposed to be used for offensive military applications. The group of Google engineers wrote an open letter saying we didn't join Google to work on defence projects. We joined Google to do cool stuff and eat jelly beans or something beanbags, or whatever else you work for Google. I'm being a bit flippant, I shouldn't be. Anyway, they wrote this open letter and Google said, actually, yeah, you're right, we don't really want to do this. And so allegedly they dropped the project. And they've also apparently they've chosen not to bid for a much larger US Department of Defence contract called JEDI, Joint Enterprise Defence Infrastructure, which is a cloud computing platform globally for defence technology. So that's an example where employees, but of course the thing is, if you're a Google employee with computer vision skills, you can walk out of the door and walk into any other job. You walk away from $250,000 a year and you walk into a $350,000 a year job. So you have the power to do that. If you're working in a coding farm somewhere in India or somewhere, it may not be so easy for you to walk out and leave. You're not so highly paid and maybe you don't have so many other options. So just because the Google engineers did that, I don't think it was a bad thing they did. I think it was a good thing. But of course they could. And there are many people that are not necessarily in a position where they can walk away from their jobs with their reputation still intact. So that isn't a form of agency that we can all employ, especially in research. If you're going to walk away from a research project, that's going to do to your career? It's an interesting question. Middle example. So Microsoft, they developed a technology called HoloLens. You've seen HoloLens? It's an augmented reality. It's like a headset and drops artifacts into your field of view, so you see the real world. But then there are digital arts, a bit like some of these phone-based augmented reality applications for chasing YouTube. But it's a headset. So anyway, this has been developed over a number of years for gaming applications. But Microsoft have a $750 million contract with the US Department of Defence for creating offensive battlefield systems using HoloLens. So this is for use by infantry to wear the headset whilst they're out in the field of theatre and war. And this gives them information, and then they use that as part of what their soldiering activities. So again, a bunch of employees wrote this letter on behalf of themselves, but also on behalf of all the people that have worked on HoloLens in the past, because it's been more than 10 years in development. So they're saying that we are concerned, we don't really want to be working on the military technology, but we're also writing on behalf of all the people that went before that created the underlying technologies. And we think that they didn't want to be working on a military application as well. And so we're saying we don't think you should be applying this technology. Microsoft's response was quite the opposite to Google. They felt that they should give military the best possible tools they could in order to minimise collateral damage, to make them much more effective as weapons of war, and to avoid incidents of being hurt and all that stuff. And so their response was, no, we believe we should continue with this project. So very, very different. And going back to the point that was made before, maybe there's an element of truth in that. Do you want the best people to be creating these targeting algorithms because they're much more likely to find the appropriate target and avoid the collateral damage, which does often happen in these situations? It's a difficult one. If weapons are going to be used, you want them to be used effectively. So two very different approaches. One organisation says, no, we actually don't think we should be doing this anyway, and the other one says we should be doing this, and we should be doing it really, really well. Interesting point, but very, very current conversation. So here's an example of where agency has been applied. This was I mentioned Cambridge Analytica there, but it's much broader than that. This is the concept of reclassifying platforms as having more responsibility for what they publish. It was more to do with fake news, in fact, and that kind of broader play, just journalism. But this was a quote from the Washington Post actually, and they identified DCMS as being remarkably well informed on the topic and having come up with some interesting kind of suggestions as to how one might regulate this emerging area. And I think they were seen as being very well informed. But I think that was in light of the questioning that various Facebook people had in the two houses of the US government, rather embarrassing question and answer sessions as compared to similar events that happened in the EU and the UK, and how much better informed our parliamentarians were on this topic than some of the American representatives were. So I think that was probably part of that story as well. But researchers, so how do we demonstrate our agency? How do we express our concerns? And what mechanisms do we have? Well, we've talked a bit about ethics approval process, but certainly what we see in the various institutions we work with, that often ethics approval in ICT in particular is quite light touch. In some cases, not non-existent, but not specifically applied. I think in some cases, many cases, regulatory approval, regulations do not really embrace issues with even current technologies, let alone novel technologies. It just can't possibly keep up. Fundamentally, regulation tends to be post hoc. Something bad happens and regulations are implemented. Occasionally you get anticipatory governance or anticipatory regulation, but it's rare because creating regulations or standards is expensive. And how on earth do you know what controls you need to apply unless you understand the parameters of use? And you only know that when there are use cases and experiences of negative impact. So funding priorities, well, the question is, does the research community anticipate these kinds of issues and prioritise funding? They've done that to a certain extent with RI. EPSRC have said that they want to spend money on RI and they see this as being an approach. But and also things around AI governance and AI ethics and all that kind of thing. So there are some funding priorities there that are focused on addressing or anticipating issues. But the question is, of course, who is the final arbiter of whether a project should be approved? I mean, the research councils say that they don't really have the expertise. They review the project on its merits, but not necessarily on its ethics. And they tend to rely on universities to review that, particularly where things are very new, very novel. Often the universities themselves have not even developed these, an understanding of what it is, what the ethical issues are. There was an example. We ran a workshop at the Alan Turing Institute some time ago where an example was raised of a project that was looking at hate speech and the ability or mechanisms to shut down hate speech on Twitter. And that was funded by a research council, and the institution that undertook the work was there as well. And what came up was that neither side really understood the issues around that project because it was so new. And ultimately there was an issue with the ability to publish the results because of Twitter's terms of service. With Twitter's terms of service, you can only publish the whole of the tweet. You can't redact any of it. You won't publish all of it at all. And what they were concerned about is labelling people who expressed hate speech on maybe one occasion as purveyors of hate speech, when actually they weren't. It was just one occasion when they were shut down. So, arguably nobody died and nothing really bad happened, but maybe some very useful insights into how one might shut down hate speech had been lost because they couldn't publish. So that was an example of both sides wanting to, feeling that the other one should be knowledgeable on this topic and being able to address that issue, but it was not identified and some useful knowledge was not published at that point. It probably will be in the future, but they'll find a way. But sometimes these things don't work out. Slippery shoulders. So midstream modulation, Ben, do you want to talk about that?
Well, midstream modulation is one suggestion of how to implement that response modulation. What it means, you probably are aware of the upstream research. So when you look at, when you try to understand consequences of research very early on, that's what they call upstream. And then there is the end user testing, which we all are familiar with the technologies or go to market. And upstream has the problem you can't, it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. End user means it's already there. And the idea of midstream is to do something in the middle. So while the technology is being developed, have some sort of reflective mechanism whereby you can try to identify what it may well do and what should be done about it. And that typically involves something like getting an ethnographer into a lab and see how things play out and interact with researchers.
But then also to reflect those findings into the research process
And
itself.
that then is supposed to, of course, it's not just the social scientists taking it away and writing a great paper, but actually then informing the way that the research is done and the technologies.
So there's a mechanism there. But of course the question is within your, assuming this is funded by a research council, if that mechanism for change was not really included or not foreseen, is it actually permitted? Do you actually go away from what you were originally intended to do?
So you don't have ethics approval on the basis of one project.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely.
So the ethics, but you also need funding. Right? So I don't think it's been done in this country. In the Netherlands, they had the NWO, the Dutch Science Foundation, they had a whole stream of responsible innovation projects which were based on this. So you could bid for funding on the basis that you would link up with a scientific project. That scientific project would allow you to access what they're doing, and that you would then feed back into this project. So this is extremely attractive to social scientists and people interested in this space. But I had a PhD looking at this, and I think the outcomes were very mixed. Whether it actually works depended very much on local context, whether people liked each other, whether the right systems were on the table. So it was a magic bullet.
So it's a mechanism there. Well, whistleblowing's another one. Well, do you want to blow a whistle on your own project or something else? And what impact does that have on you and your position and your job and all that? I met with a large defence contractor recently, and we talked about whistleblowing. They use the concept of speaking up rather than whistleblowing. So the idea, I think the concept there is maybe your voice is if there are others that have had a concern, that you're adding to the weight of the concern. So you're not the person who created this intervention, if an intervention results, you're just adding to the intelligence base of concerns, and then an intervention happens at some point. So I quite like that. I think the idea of speaking up is a lot better than just whistleblowing. You think of Edward Snowden or one of the releases of American cables. So project termination, so it does and has happened, but on very few occasions we'll actually look at a case study where that's happened as a result of RRI. So it has happened, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do. So anticipatory governance is another one. So identifying an issue and stimulating the creation of standards or legislation that will address that issue. So I mean, to a certain extent, GDPR has included that with a requirement to be able to explain automated decision making if no human intervention occurs. One might argue that's an attempt at anticipatory governance, putting something in place to manage the ever-increasing use of machine learning or adaptive systems in business in particular. But we'll see how well that works out. But there aren't many good examples of anticipatory governance being effective, because clearly if it's anticipatory, you don't really know what the issues are and what are your remedies. If you put governance in place and you prevent things happening, you have no idea whether what you're preventing is truly problematic. It's very difficult to say. Why would an industry adopt a governance regime if there's no reason to believe that, particularly no evidence to show at that point this issue is going to happen? It's scientists thinking about what could happen and putting controls in place for something that doesn't even exist. But of course the problem comes there is when the speed of innovation is so fast that the regulation can't keep up. So that you may say that nothing exists yet and something's going to happen in the future and blah 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 blah. But the truth of the matter is you can write some code over a weekend, deploy it to 1 billion people, and they may or may not adopt it. They may not necessarily use it in their everyday life, but it can be deployed at scale almost instantaneously. So how does regulation work in that environment? Do you wait for something to happen and then just regulate it? Maybe you do. That's what we generally do. But what happens if it's really problematic? So this idea of anticipatory governance does tend to suggest that there's a long lead time between cause and effect. I'm not sure that's really true in what this is all sort of fourth industrial revolution stuff. And then we talked a bit about mechanisms here, about ethical black boxes, the idea of recording the built state, as it were, of your machine learning system, so you can then go back and see why it did something in the future. So like a flight data recorder, but for AI machine learning systems. AI governance, another one. This is something that there's some work going on with DARPA, in the US Defence Research Funder. They do work on a thing called adaptive assurance, looking at how you might assure autonomous systems, and the idea of allowing areas of autonomy and then implementing what they call hard countermeasures, so that when a system is about to stray into a very problematic area, there's a hard stop in place. So it allows the power of adaptive systems to respond to their environment and gives them the freedom to do that. But it recognises that there are areas where these systems shall not go, and it puts hard countermeasures in place. But again, we don't really know whether that's going to work or not. But it's an interesting concept for an AI governor. You're free to do whatever you like here, but don't go there and don't go here. Interesting idea. Well, the people, to what extent do the people have any control? Well, you can reject technology, you can try and slow its adoption, but that's not really worked out terribly well in the long term. It may just delay things, but maybe delays enough. Maybe delaying something or resisting a change is long enough to allow humanity to adapt itself, to prepare itself. I mean, the work going on now on kind of embedding STEM skills across education, I think maybe is part of that we've got enough time to build up our skills to address the coming changes. It hasn't got a great track record. And of course other mechanisms. I mean, we actually showed this slide first time last week when the climate strike was happening now. In fact, one of the attendees had actually been to one of the demonstrations that day in Edinburgh, so we're very, very current. People are trying to express themselves and showing some kind of agency, but we'll see whether it makes any difference or not, really. But, it is a mechanism. It's unknown effectiveness. And this is kind of closing remark here. Well, it's all very well. Whilst you're looking out for the red-eyed robot that's chasing you down the road, or the drone, it may be that actually small incursions on your privacy and your well-being that's caused by technology is actually causing you a lot more damage. So whilst you're looking out for that big scary thing, it may be the small changes actually really change your way of living and your way of life significantly. You don't even realise it. Well, we've done a coffee break. We're running a little bit late. I'd like to hand over to Professor Sell.
So this, so far what Martin has done is give you some introduction of some of the ideas or some of the issues that may be relevant and why this is interesting. And I hope that has worked so far. A few things about who puts their weight behind the idea of responsible innovation, and the answer is surely a lot of people. This here is an extract from Theresa May's speech last year. Does anybody remember Theresa May? So it sounds
back if she likes.
She will very well be back next week. Yeah. I mean, so in political terms, this is ancient history, but it's only a year old, and I think it's probably still relatively current. What I found interesting at the time, and I still find it striking, is that this was her speech giving at Davos. And now at Davos you can of course talk about whatever you want. But what she focused on really was the social impact of technology and what government can or should do in order to address that. So I mean the whole thing is online if you're interested. And some of you're a historian, right? You might want to read it. But what I found interesting is that she said, that she focused on this, in particular AI, and said, well, we're going to do something about it. We need to make sure that technology is something that works for everybody in society, that the investments we put into those technologies, they're huge, as we all know, because we benefit, that those are something that works for all of us. Right? And she goes back into the history all the way to to earlier technologies, Industrial Revolution. Now here's something more current. This is yesterday. This is Boris speaking at the UN, and very kindly providing a few quotes for me here for today. He is a lot less optimistic than Theresa May was, but if you look at what he said, this is actually from The Guardian. If you look at The Guardian today, there's a page with these quotes and a few more quotes. I'll pick these because they're IT-oriented, right? But he's very dystopian about it. Alexa will pretend to take orders, but in fact, she'll be stepping the foot. So this idea that technology develops a character and becomes recalcitrant. Next one here is questions around privacy. Google is going to know everything, know thought, or maybe who already does that. No, very fitting with your last slide, which is the big guy Terminator is coming back, is going haunt us. And then synthetic biology, what will it bring to us? Will it make us more healthy, or will we have those glorified chickens without any bones in them, which are great? Now, again, I think what I find most, whether any of that is relevant is a different question, but what I find really interesting about it is that here stands Boris Johnson, a man who has a lot of problems on his hands right now, and he stands in front of the UN and talks about technology. He didn't say anything about this in his interviews. I think they were all around prorogation and so on. But in his speech, the thing that was prepared, it's around, well, how do we deal with the world? How do we deal with the technology that we have? So it is very clearly an ongoing concern of our political masters. It's not just the UK. The European Union, as again you all know very well, puts a lot of money into research. We're now ramping up towards Horizon Europe, and the budget of that will be, 100 billion, somewhere thereabouts, lots of money. The EU has been worried for quite a while about the consequences of what comes out of the research that they pay for. And they have a long history of stuff that started out as Science and Society, that I think was FP6, and then it turned into Science in Society, which was FP7. Now in Horizon 2020, it's called Science with and for Society, and what it's going to be called in Horizon Europe, I don't know yet. Hopefully, it's still be there. But that's where they locate their responsible research and innovation. So there's the London Declaration is one of those big political declarations about the importance of science. So they say, science and research are part of the fundament of our wealth. The Rome Declaration was one specifically on responsible research and innovation. This was done in 2014, 2015 or so, when the European Union very clearly stated that they see responsible research and innovation as this ongoing process of combining research and innovation is something that they want to embed into their framework of research. And they said that all the member states should do this individually, and they also do this collectively. Now, as part of this, in Horizon 2020, the overall funding for responsible research and innovation was, now it's a bit debatable, but somewhere around €1 billion, partly through this specific Science with and for Society, which was about 300-400 million, and also partly through embedding this in all the other programs. So in ICT, in health, and so on. The idea was that there are activities which are aligned with the idea of responsible research and innovation. So it was a big pot of money. How much of that actually materialized in the end, I don't know. But so they bandied around the figure of $1 billion early on. Now this is the one that's probably most relevant with regards to the CDTs, and I guess Cambridge also gets quite a bit of money from EPSSE. So EPSSE has adopted responsible research and innovation as part of its strategic position. So if you look at this is where they explain what they think it is. But they have recognized that as a public funder of research, they have responsibility for what happens with the money that they invest, and also there is some responsibility on them to think about the consequences. So responsible research and innovation has been quite heavily emphasized by them for a while, even though how exactly it's supposed to materialize is something that's still very much open to debate, which is where Orbit comes in as one way of doing that. So there are lots of examples of that, and we probably need to update this. So at the moment, for example, I think this week a call closes, which is on responsible natural language processing. So we have that on there. So you as people working in research governance may be aware that there are requirements for particular types of calls where they want specific and explicit attention to responsible research and innovation, including the CDT call, where there was a paragraph around all CDTs have to do responsible research and innovation. And they have to do it on the basis that they teach the individual student, but they also have to do it on a higher level, so it needs to be integrated into the structure of the CDT. And we're still trying to figure out how the CDT directors of the people who wrote proposals interpreted that. And if we find lots of other examples of that. So for I think for all fellowship proposals, I think you have to have a section on responsible research innovation. And in general, is that on the next slide? Yes. So in the delivery plan, which came out in July, I think, they also they continue to stress this. So EPSSC is still very clear that they see themselves as having some sort of responsibility for what they're funding, and they also want to see that is perpetuated by the people who receive the money. So they see an importance in interacting with the public, in reaching out, in engaging, but also in reporting back possible problems and many other things.
I mean, I assume it's not only EPSSC that has these statements and plans.
Interestingly, it is EPSSC that has adopted this particular term. So
EPSSC, MRC, and other.
So MRC, of course, has the well-established ethics processes, but the only research council at this point, under the UCRI umbrella, that has explicitly, to my knowledge, adopted responsibility is EPSSC. So that is in the process of preparing these delivery plans for all the research councils. I think that was discussed within UCRI. So if you look at the Technology Strategy Board, they have it mirrors this to some degree, even though they have no specific statement around our strategy on their website. So and EPSSC, I think, is in discussion now that they are part of UCRI, in discussion about where this sits and how this is supposed to turn into a cross-council activity. But to the best of my knowledge, that's still on board. But so the point to make here really is that this is certainly for the EPSSC, it's on the big on the radar. So that was the question of who cares? Well, people have money, and hopefully everybody else, but also the people who have the money. Right. So so far we haven't really said what is responsible research innovation. We've talked about things that people may be worried about. Ethical, social, other concerns. But of course, these questions are not at all new. Right? And one of the games I like to play with my students is ask them, what is the most important invention that you can think of? Can you take this? Everybody gets a go. What's the most important invention or new piece of knowledge that's ever happened?
Fire.
Yeah, fire, a strong contender. Yeah, or the ability to master it. Yeah.
Wheel.
Fire, wheel. Yeah.
I thought about penicillin, but then that
yeah. Fire, wheel. Sort of a similar category.
I'm going to be controversial and say writing.
Writing. Here comes the humanities scholar. I would expect no less from a philosopher.
Well, you've got the printing press there, so
Printing
I'll
press.
say that.
It's just sort of a continuation of writing. Once you invented writing, you start printing.
All the ones gone, but they did the plough to allow
Agriculture would be something that made us right. So maybe I should have shown this picture first. If you ask students that, you get some of them who give this sort of profound answer, and then you have some of them who say, well, Facebook.
Wow.
And then, of course, once you come to the plough and fire and agriculture, they say, oops. The point being here really is that we've had very fundamental technical revolutions over the history of humanity. I believe that's what we are. Humans are the tool using animals. And that shapes us more than we can ever think about. But when a new technical revolution comes along, it raises all these questions. Who's going to benefit from it? Who's going to pay for it? What are the consequences? And in general, we of course cannot answer any of these questions when they come along. When Gutenberg built this thing, he had no idea that he was going to lead to Reformation and endless European wars. None of that was predicted before. Just like Otto Hahn probably wouldn't have predicted the atomic bomb and so on. But that's the fact that we know that this is a difficult question to answer, or these are difficult questions to answer, does not take away from the importance of the questions. So I think most people will agree that it would be nice to think about these questions and at least have some sort of handle on what answers might be. So this is an example of ethical issues that this comes from a proposal for a European project where we try to figure out, well, what are the ethical issues around AI. Now this was drawn up in 2016, I think, so way before all the AI hype happened. And we thought we were really original and thinking about ethical issues of AI. And of course, this is now completely run of the mill, and we have so many publications on the ethics of AI, I can't imagine. But these are just some of the examples of things that were already discussed about 3 years ago. Right? And which ones of those are important, and which one is the most important one, and which ones of those can be addressed, and which one and how we do that? It's of course, these are questions that many people ask at this point. So what is responsible research and innovation now? This is a definition. This comes from the Rri Tools project. The logo. This is a very high-level definition. Rri as a way to do research that takes a long-term perspective on the kind of world we live in. And I like this because it's so all-encompassing. It's not a tick-boxing thing. It's not a simple thing that's easy to realize. It's about, well, where do we stand in the world? What do we collectively as humans or as part of a group or society think we want to achieve? And how can we make sure that the research we undertake is conducive to that future? So that's very basic, fundamental. And all of the tick boxing, and there will be tick boxing, I think, at some point in Rri, really has to live up to this ambition. And of course, now, having social scientists and humanity scholars in the room, we will of course immediately point out we're probably never going to be able to agree on this question anyway. So we, in a pluralistic society, have very little agreement of what the world we live in, and even less how we're going to get there. But again, the fact that we will find it difficult to answer the question doesn't mean we shouldn't ask it. So that was the sort of the high-level societal aspect of it. But then there's also a instrumental value. So the idea is by doing this, and what this means we'll come to later on, by doing responsible innovation, we not only contribute to the world we want to live in, but we also improve the research we do. So by engaging with stakeholders, by thinking about possible outcomes, by reflecting on how we do things, why we do things, we as researchers can make the research better, we make it more open, more transparent, and hopefully we come up with better research questions to ask and better ways of asking. So that's sort of the pitch to the CBT students. So not only are you supposed to do it, you get paid to do it, and it's a good thing to do, but it'll also help you to do that. And then we have a set of further ones. So this is about enabling a broader definition, or by Rri enables a broader definition, way of defining researchers and their own society, having both science and society. So you can see on the science and society terminology, this is an FP7 project. But the idea is to bring together the not necessarily always identical views of society as a whole and of the research community. And to make sure that there is a mechanism that allows them to communicate. A key aspect of this is engagement, engaging with all actors in the research, and that means, and now I said this earlier, it's not just a one-way communication, it's not just the researchers telling the rest of the world what they're doing, but it's also about listening to what the rest of the world has to say, about taking this into account and reflecting on it in the research. And as a consequence, the hope is that this will lead to research and research outcomes that are more conducive to societal needs. How will we know what the societal needs are? Martin's going to talk about that later. This is, again, from the European perspective, from the President of the European Research Council, as an argument to persuade researchers that it's not just something that they have to do, but by allowing them to get out of the silo, seeing beyond their immediate environment, they understand better what the research is supposed to do. So now move away from being purely specialized and looking beyond your close horizons. And how are we doing for time? Do we want to do the area framework now?
It's fairly short, isn't it?
Yeah. So, okay. So this then, these are sort of the high-level political ambitions in terms of what responsible research innovation means in EPSSE speak. It's the area framework. Area stands for anticipate, reflect, engage, adapt. So those are the four components that EPSSE has adopted as part of their view of responsible innovation. This comes from Richard Owen, Jack Stable, and collaborators who worked for the EPSSE in 2011, 12 somewhere. And it's very widely adopted in slightly different versions and flavors. So one thing is about anticipation. It's about thinking about possible consequences, possible futures, which is something that can be done as a methodology. You know, there are ways of doing this. You can do by scenarios, you can do data studies there. But lots of things you can do it as part of a structured approach to foresight. But it can also be less structured. It can be the conversation on the water cooler, the engagement with somebody who has experience in implementing something in industry. The point being is that it's about thinking about not just imaginable futures, but futures that are worth considering. And that comes back to what we talked about in coffee, and not just thinking about the positive outcomes. Yes, by all means, let's think about positive outcomes. Why do we want to do research about our positive expectations? But also being honest about negative ones. And while we do not know the future by definition is unknown, we can think about consequences, and we can also think about consequences in all sorts of directions. And this, to me, is the heart of this anticipation part of the area framework. Now, be honest about what we think is likely to happen. And that, at this point, doesn't really happen. If you write a proposal, if you do research, you're never asked to do this. You're never asked to say anything cautionary, with the exception of risk registers. In some types of proposals, you have to write your risk register, and of course, I mean, after this myself, you write your risk register in a way that you're absolutely certain that you can mitigate every single risk you could put on there, so that it's completely manageable. And if you can think of a risk that you can't manage, you're not going to put it on there. And I think that's something that at this point there are no established methodologies to think about the foreseeable but unintended consequences. And there are some suggestions. So somebody suggested, for example, to write what they call misuse cases. If you're from the computing world, you may know the term use case. Use cases are the description of what you think the technology should do. And if you can write use cases, why can't you write misuse cases? And Cambridge Analytica is an obvious one where you could say, this probably was foreseeable. We didn't, or anybody who did talk about it. Secondly, reflection. So reflexivity is another concept that has a long social science tradition. The idea here in responsible innovation, I think, is about making sure that people, all the different stakeholders, think about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. And to some degree, of course, researchers do that anyway. If you want to do research, you have to think about what you do. So you write your methodology, you write what sort of data you collect, what you can do with it. So there is an aspect of reflexivity built into research. You couldn't do research without it. But the reflexivity here from the responsible innovation perspective, I think, is a step higher. Or I would call it a second order reflexivity. It's thinking about how you think about what you do. And there are, again, different ways and mechanisms of doing that, from project structures where you have, I don't know, an advisory board. The European Commission these days tends to ask people for the appointment of an ethics expert, which I don't think works particularly well, but that's a way of forcing people to think about what they do. Engage. It's key, and these three things also fit together. Engagement means you talk to your stakeholders in an open and deliberative manner, so you're inclusive, participatory, and there are loads and loads of different ways of doing that. Engagement, in many cases, also then flips over into the other two. So Many of the anticipation methodologies that exist involve engagement. So if you do a Delphi study, for example, that's that type of engagement. If you do the citizen jury. So those are mechanisms that exist. And the point again being is it's going to be open. It's going to be allow a two-way communication. And then as a consequence of that, you do something. And I think that's really the most difficult part, and that's, I think, where all it will hopefully make a difference. Because it's relatively easy to talk about the aspiration to anticipate, reflect, engage, but then what? How do we go from here? What do we do? And I suspect EPSRC has adopted the act because they wanted to make it very clear that it's not just about an exercise where somebody sits down and writes a paper. It's something which informs how you do research. And it has manifest consequences to the way you do your work. And we'll talk a little bit about what the various ways are in which you can act. And that can flip over to all sorts of other activities, such as corporate social responsibilities, standardization. There are many ways in which we do this. So that is what the EPSRC has identified as the principles of responsible innovation. And as part of the Orbit project, or its predecessor projects, we've tried to make this slightly more manageable by adding the 4 Ps. So we said if you do responsible research and innovation, if you look at your area framework, you can break this down further in different aspects of the research. So you need to think about the process of the research, so how do you do the research, and things like research ethics are put in here. This is about thinking about how you do research. Research ethics typically less interested in what comes out of it. It's much more interested in what you do. But the interesting, or one difference between research ethics and RI is that RI is very explicitly also interested in the product, the outcome. So what happens at the end of it, and how do you deal with your ideas about what that might be. RI is also interested in the purpose, into why do we do research. And this is something that research ethics, in my experience, doesn't cover, because research ethics assumes that we do research for the right reasons. And that's because it's very strongly rooted in biomedical research, where the idea is you will understand diseases, you can heal diseases, nobody's going to ever argue with that, so you don't need to worry about the purpose. Now that's very different when you look, for example, at IT research, or a lot of other technical research. And the example that Martin gave earlier about building an addiction into smartphones. There are people who actually explicitly do that. They don't call it addiction, but a lot of the research in IT is done for purposes which are not necessarily uncontroversial. So that's one of the things we're looking at. And all of this, of course, requires to think about people who are affected, in what way are they affected. And we have, I don't know whether we have no, I don't think we brought any written versions of this. So you can turn this, the 4 Ps and the area framework, into a little matrix, which we've done, which we can show you on the website later, which is an easy tool that you can use to do a quick and dirty responsible research and innovation analysis. So you think about, well, how do you anticipate about the process? How do you anticipate about the product? And then you can just fill in and think about those questions. And not doing too bad now.
That's it. Good. Thank you.
Lunch.
Whatever we might think about Boris.
Boris is very nice. Again, the right quotes at the right time.
He did, didn't he?
Yeah. He may not be Prime Minister tomorrow, but for today.
Yeah. I wonder who wrote that speech. Originally, it was Ben Hall's piece in it.
He wrote it to his own.
He wrote it through his own speech, yeah. So he said, I'll launch it now. You know, I wonder where Boris thinks this.
Well, I guess it wasn't Dominic who wrote that.
No, I don't think so.
Could I ask a quite practical question?
Yeah.
So if we go on and teach these things to our PhD students, are you happy for us to use your 4 Ps as an example? Because that's exactly your will.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the 4 Ps are not officially adopted by EPSRC, are they?
No, they are an overthink. Yeah. So I'll show you in a minute where I can get a nice graphic of the. I can do it now.
Would we be able to get a copy of the slides at the end of the training?
If you go to the Orbit website, I would assume so.
Okay.
So if you go to the About Orbit, About RI, that one there, yeah. So there should be a, no, it's not there. I need to put the middle one there. The area 4 pre-framework, that's where it should be. So this is, so the Orbit website is orbitri.org, and if you go to the, if you go to About Orbit, then there should be a,
Area 4P framework.
to the, yeah, so there's the Area 4P framework, and there should be a pretty PDF of that somewhere here. There. Download the framework as a PDF, and it is pretty. There. See, it's even got color. And so what we've done, so here are the 4 Ps, here's the area, and for each of those we have some, what we call scaffolding questions, so some ideas that you could ask, some possible answers. So this is, I think, as an initial exercise for people to just get their head around what the type of question is that they should be asking the question. I find this very useful.
Yeah. We've actually been through this with the CDC settings and sockets. Actually, on the 3D printing of sockets, and actually sort of fill in all these boxes. It's quite a process, really. It really gets you kind of through.
Yeah, so you're not doing this in 2 minutes.
Yeah, not sure, but actually it's really quite powerful. So you know exactly what you're doing. What you're doing it, why you're doing it.
Do you know whether EPSRC are going to adopt this framework to replace things like the risk register and pathways to?
I think that's contested within EPSRC. So another thing that we come to later on is that this is the EPSRC flavor, the EU flavor of responsibility is very different. Right. And in the EU flavor of responsibility, for example, a component is gender. Whereas in the EPSRC, equality and diversity is in a different department. So what exactly fits in and doesn't and goes in and goes out, I think is not completely settled. And the EPSRC, I think, EPSRC is very reluctant to change their processes. So we tried, for example, to persuade them that if they're serious about this, they should actually turn this into an evaluation material. And so on your review for a proposal, there should be a section, have they done RRI? But EPSRC doesn't want that. They say any changes to their processes are so cumbersome, so complicated, and so political. Trying to not do that. So short answer is any other?
Just very practical question. Are we going to get the slides?
We'll provide a summary of the slides.
Okay. If there's some links and things that we can have to do the rest of the
The lunch is served outside. We go out to the garden in front to breathe in some traffic.
Well, maybe, given that we're next to the Dyson building, maybe we could just have a look at what engineering is building here.
Yeah. I'm sure they wouldn't mind an impromptu inspection.
Yes, yeah, the ethics inspection.
Yeah.